Welcome, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started here. I now call to order this work session of the Anchorage Assembly regarding AO 2022-100, amending building codes to allow independent plan review. It is Thursday, December 1, 2022. We are scheduled from 1:30 until 2:30 p.m. today. Documents for this work session are available online at muni.org/worksessions. We'll go ahead and begin by having Assembly members state their name for the record, starting with Peterson.
Pete Peterson.
Daniel Boland.
Kevin Cross.
Suzanne LaFrance. And Madam Clerk, have we had any members join on the phone? Okay. I want to note that Mr. Dunbar is on guard duty and is excused. Ms. Allard and Mr. Constant are also excused, but if their schedules allow, may join by phone later. And same for Mr. Solt. Ms. Quinn Davidson will be joining via phone as well later. And with that, I will turn to the sponsors. I want to note that this item is 14F on the December 6th regular meeting agenda this coming Tuesday. And Mr. Cross, will you be kicking off the discussion?
I will. Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, everybody. Excellent. Well, in Anchorage, there are lots of rules that oversee construction and development, and most of these make very good sense, such as making sure that there's negative grade away from foundations to prevent water intrusion into crawl spaces and jeopardize properties. And there's also some that don't, such as requiring fire sprinklers over swimming pools in public buildings. All right. But in most circumstances, we find in life that success or failure in any process or relation happens gradually and then suddenly. Small incremental changes over time can create very large problems. And right here in this assembly, not a week goes by that we don't deal with the ramifications of a massive housing shortage and stagnation development and unintended hurdles and challenges that the public faces daily in order to make our city flourish and grow. Now, several years ago, facing very strong opposition from the Building Board and Development Services departments, the Assembly approved third-party independent plan review for single-family and duplexes in a very narrow 6-5 vote. The concern was that if this happened and we allowed third-party plan review, that contractors would undermine the system, perhaps producing inferior product, cut corners, and put the public in harm's way. All those have proven to be without merit. Fortunately, this change has had a very positive impact on residential construction. This is because most knowledgeable amongst us are not always public employees and are often honest, hardworking people who diligently serve the private sector, trying to improve the world in their own way. AO 2100 seeks to extend independent structural plan review to commercial construction, allowing us to build upon a proven success of an existing model from the residential side. Independent plan review is currently being practiced all across the United States, in fact, and in such cities such as Fort Worth, Texas, Denver, Colorado, Long Beach, California, Vancouver, Washington, Orlando, Florida, all of which have their own issues, but have discovered that the process of independent third-party plan review removes the politics out of construction. So what are the benefits? The benefits is the use of experienced, licensed, bonded, insured engineers who are trained and certified in their specific field to review structural plans. A current request for third-party review only covers 2 reviews and is actually not much of a review process, but is actually an expedited plan process, which tax on fees on top of the growing permitting fees, which have grown 25 to 30% in just the last 2 years. Dealing directly with an engineer will improve communication, decrease delays, and will speed up the process by 2 to 3 months, according to the Alaska Association of General Contractors and the Anchorage Home Builders and other sources, while reducing expenses. One of the things to keep in mind is that construction times require very tight schedules. There is a significant value in faster turnaround times and improved communications with your engineers and architects. Private sector engineers are more likely to work non-traditional hours, work more hours, respond faster, even reply on the weekends. And this in turn reduces the likelihood of work being started without a permit, which often occurs when contractors are under the gun facing weather delays. They would rather get fined for having a permit than suffer the thousands of dollars in fees and in delays. So qualified, licensed, bonded, insured, and reputable engineers. So what were some of the concerns? What were some of the concerns about this that I heard? Well, was that qualified, licensed, bonded, insured, and reputable engineers would do favors for builders, resulting in faulty building design, or would cut corners. But it's important to note that all buildings will still require visual inspections for code compliance. That's right. They will still require visual inspections for code compliance from the MOA. Also, private and sector employees are required to carry liability insurance and protecting the building owner, something that right now the MOA doesn't offer. And finally, the building department can still review plans if they suspect malfeasance. They are not prevented from auditing a plan and reviewing it if they suspect that there's issues. And then additionally, the complaint that I heard is that the reduced workload might cause layoffs within the department and create issues. But however, it's important to note that we are not removing individuals' jobs. We are shifting the workload to highly qualified private sector of engineers. We are actually providing more jobs within the community and eliminate the holding expense of labor within the municipality that we are required to maintain during slow periods, thus saving the taxpayers significant money and reducing costs. So with that, I urge you to support 2022-100. And I would offer, if anybody from the building department who is invited would like to come, I would like to know their input and ask them some questions. Do we have anybody from the building department?
And that's
Fantastic.
fine. If you would like to come on up and grab a seat here, grab a microphone, and then if you go ahead and state your name for the record, and then you can go ahead, Mr. Cross.
Yeah, my name's Ross Knopfsinger. I supervise plan review for the MOA.
Thank you, Mr. Knopfsinger. A couple questions. First, did you have anything to add? Any statements before I get into some questions? Out of curiosity.
You can go ahead and go with your questions.
Oh, I appreciate that. Thank you. One, does the state of Alaska review anything other than fire and life safety?
Yeah, I believe just the State of Alaska Fire Marshal's Office just reviews for fire and life safety. The Department of Labor does do electrical inspections and plumbing and mechanical inspections, and those probably do involve the inspectors doing a bit of plan review.
Excellent. Can you, in the note that I received from the Building Board of Regulations examiners, they say they already have a third-party independent structural review process. However, it is significantly different than the residential side. So would you mind explaining in detail what the current third-party review process looks like and what those fees might be?
So currently we have two contractors under contract with the MOA to provide structural plan review, Kaufman Engineers and Reed Middleton. And a permit applicant can elect to have their project be reviewed by the contractors versus our structural plan reviewers. And there's a 25% increase in the plan review portion of the permit fee to go through that process.
Excellent. And and once they pay that 25% and they have a chance, it's my understanding that they meet at the MOA. It's a sit down at a table and there's only 2 visits. Could you explain a little bit more about that process looks like and what liberties are afforded an individual that chooses that process?
Yeah, no, the process is nothing like that.
All right.
The process is we send a copy of the plans and the calculations to the third-party reviewer, and they basically review it, issue plan review comments in the form of a letter that comes back to us and that we pass on to the permit applicant, and basically we go back and forth until the comments are resolved and the structural review is approved.
And what do those timeframes typically look like?
Well, we haven't done it since 2018. No one's elected to have their plan set out since 2018. And in 2018, only 3 projects went out. And then prior to that, no one sent anything out until 2015. One project went out in 2015. It was the cement dome down by the port. But the review timeline ends up being probably pretty similar to the review timeline that one would experience with our plan review. And back in the mid 2000s, the process got used fairly heavy because basically we were in a building boom back then, as you recall, a lot of construction going on. And the MOA at that point in time really had a hard time keeping up with the volume of work coming through. So to answer your question, yeah, the timeline would be the same. The initial review, depending on the size and complexity of the project, the first round of comments could come out anywhere from 2 to 4 weeks after they received the submittal, but typically it would have been closer to about 2 weeks to get the review comments.
Why do you hypothesize that third-party review option that you have is not being utilized to the extent that it could be?
Well, the major downside to the third-party review is, versus having our in-house staff do it, is invariably issues come up during construction where the contractor may see a more efficient way or a better way of doing something, or they may run into some sort of conflict. And our in-house reviewers that can generally respond much more quickly to stuff like that, much more informally. A lot of times they don't really know how big the problem is, so they can just email them and they can get, a response back within the day. Versus when it's a third-party contractor like that, it can be more cumbersome because they're entitled to compensation, for any additional review services that they provide.
So another issue that was brought up on it is that there may be individuals who lack of experience or lack of knowledge, although they may be certified through the state, basically a diminished quality coming from third-party review process. Can you speak a little bit about the license qualifications and the education of the individuals that we have within the municipality, and how they would say compare to some of our private sector engineers?
Well, for private sector engineers in general, or like private sector doctors or any other discipline, you've got the full gamut of experience, qualification, and ethics, right? Just because someone's a medical doctor doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be ethical. Doesn't necessarily mean they're going to know what they're doing, or they may be practicing outside their area of expertise and not really letting the customer know that they're practicing outside their area of expertise. The process we go through is a formal RFP process. It goes through the purchasing department where we put, RFPs out on the street. Engineering firms respond to them. We review the firm's qualifications. We want a principal engineer, principal structural engineer, senior structural engineer, the staff engineers that are probably going to be doing, the grunt work, the review work, how they're being overseen by the senior and the principal engineers, the structure, the amount of staff they have, the qualifications of the staff, what type of structures are they reviewing? Here in the municipality, we're reviewing everything from like simple little single-story box buildings to some of the most structurally complex structures being built in the state. Like this 4th Avenue project that's going to be coming through here in a few months. It's a 4-story parking garage with 2 high-rise towers on top of it. And they're going to build it in phases. That's a pretty complex structural review, and we have reviewers on staff that have reviewed stuff like that, and the contractors we're using have designed and reviewed stuff like that. So
I think it's important to note that we get our MOA structural employees. They come from I would say that they came from the private sector in some point. So I guess I'm curious if there's a varying degree of experience in the private sector, is it safe to say there's also a varying degree of experience amongst in our review process?
Oh, totally. Yeah.
Okay. So,
I mean, we hire them, and generally they don't have much experience, and You know, we introduce them slowly. You're going to be doing wood structures till you get solid on wood structures. Then we might move them on to steel structures. And then we might move them on to concrete structures. You know, we've got 2 guys that can do it all, right? And then we've got a couple guys that are really good with wood. We're not going to give them a high-rise building downtown, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The current independent plan review that we're currently using in residential, which according to the Anchorage home builders and from contractors, they seem to favor or have good things to say about it. Have you seen that result in any negative ramifications? Have you seen a decrease in quality of construction? Has it created problems that safety issues?
There has been some problematic projects. There are some systems that are going pretty good, pretty flawlessly, where a builder has teamed up with a good reviewer and they got a good system going, and they're, you know, but there's also some people out there that are doing review that, quite frankly, aren't doing a very thorough job. And
you're finding those in the inspection period when you go out to inspect them?
Generally, we find them in the inspection period, because we're not just like randomly pulling projects off the shelf and seeing how, you know, what kind of shape they're in. Correct.
And
if
I just
you're
want to pause real quick, sorry, Mr. Cross, to note that we've been joined by Ms. Zalatel and also Mr. Constant on the phone.
Thank you. So knowing that you're able to identify those individuals that maybe don't live up to the caliber that we would like to see, are you able then to say, okay, when we see a plan or review come by them, that's someone that we should probably devote a little bit more time or look a little bit closer just because their track record is less stellar than others? Is that something that you would do?
That's a little problematic, actually. It really puts us in a tough spot where we've got somebody out there that's a structural engineer. They're licensed as a structural engineer, and they're doing poor quality work and dealing with that situation. Is that maybe on the surface that sounds like an easy thing to do, but in reality, that's a pretty challenging situation to deal with.
Excellent. Let's see, contractors. That's about all the questions I had. If anybody from staff had a question from the assembly.
Go ahead, Mr. Boland.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you to Member Cross for letting me kind of join in on this conversation. Folks will know that I've co-sponsored this, but certainly am open to having dialogue about this, you know, and we received a letter from Keith Soboleski at the Board of Building Regulations Examiners and Appeals Chair, you know, raising some concerns, and I hear the concerns that you're bringing forward here today. And for me, you know, I think that we have an assembly that is really aligned right now in wanting to do whatever we can to make it basically streamline the process for building housing and make it more affordable to build housing. And we want to tackle the housing shortage in our community, as Member Cross addressed. You know, that said, I am approaching this conversation with sort of listening ears and a mind to learn more. And I do want to be aware of, you know, and avoid potentially any unintended consequences. I also want to make sure that we honor and take care of our municipal employees who do good work for us in this process. That being said, I do have a couple questions. I could feel my eyebrow perking up when you used the metaphor of like a doctor in the community. Well, I'm an eye doctor, and I will say there are some eye doctors that are potentially less ethical than others, but there's a reason that we're licensed and that we go through the education and the training and the board's testing that we do. And if somebody's practicing without a license, or they are practicing in a way that is not ethical or within their scope, there are penalties for that. So it's just kind of interesting. You know, what it would be, it's almost like saying somebody would have to go to the Anchorage Health Department to get examined. They couldn't go out to the community to get an examination or something. So I don't know. I find that an interesting line of reasoning. But questions that I have, is there currently a backlog of structural review projects? What's the waiting period right now?
No, there's no backlog right now. If you'd submit a project right now, it probably would get looked at within 1 to 2 weeks.
And then that process, typically, how long does that take from start to finish when then it's able to proceed on to the next step?
It really depends on the complexity of the building. Some of our larger, more complex buildings will have over 1,000 pages of calculations. And it can take a whole week to review something like that.
Okay. You said earlier, I don't know if you were speaking sort of hypothetically or in more literal terms, that you have 2 guys who can do it all and two guys who just do wood structures. Are those actual numbers, or how many people are working in the department right now doing this type of review?
Currently, we have 5 structural plan reviewers, but as of the day after tomorrow, we'll have 4.
Okay.
And then on February 24th, I lose another one, and I'll be down to 3.
If you were to consider, okay, so we're going to be losing a couple guys. What would fully staffed look like for you?
I think right now in this economy, probably 4 structural reviewers would be fully staffed.
And so
it really comes down to the turnaround time during the busy season, right? It's unfortunately the work doesn't come in, at the same amount all the time.
Right.
Starting in March, there's this, and the amount of review work really increases, and we probably peak maybe in April, May or somewhere, and then we stay pretty high through the summer. So and then this time of year would be our slowest time of year.
Okay, so is it your perspective then when we get to that busy time, early summer, and folks are wanting to build, that with 4 reviewers, that would be fully staffed and there would be no backlog beyond normal?
And if I may, it's the process has evolved into basically the reality of construction, commercial construction, is that builders and developers are generally ahead of their engineers and architects, meaning they want to start construction before their plans are even done, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the vast majority of these big buildings that come in, we're reviewing them before they're done being designed. And we phase them. We let them come in with maybe like a core and shell type of submittal. And the structural's got to lead everybody. They've got to be out in front of everybody. And so the structural engineer and the architect are coordinating closely. And so the structural submittal that we get first, we'll get like an 80% complete structural submittal that we will review with the goal of approving a footing and foundation permit. We want to make sure that the loads are all right, such that the foundation's adequate to support the building. And then we get them that F&F permit so that we can get the builder building, get them moving. A lot of times we'll give them like an excavation permit to start putting in the utilities and preparing the lot. Then a footing and foundation permit to get them building. Then a lot of times, like on a really big building, like I envision on this 4th Avenue project, we're going to give them probably some sort of like structural frame permit. So if the steel starts going up, this might be a concrete building, whatever. And then we might give them a core and shell permit, and then maybe the full permit, right? And it's evolved into that so as to minimize impact on timelines, to let this builder who's out in front of everybody get going on his project and start building it before the thing's even fully designed.
Thank you. I appreciate that. That's helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Volin. I put myself in the queue, and then also Ms. Zelatel's in the queue. And a couple of questions, and thank you for being here today. And thanks to the sponsors. I think it's really important to look at ways in which we can reasonably streamline uni processes. So I really do appreciate this conversation. My first question is, since we did get the letter from the Board of Building Regulations, Examiners and Appeals with an invitation, to work with them to take a look at the proposed changes, and who all has been involved so far in the drafting process?
Primarily myself, my teammates, and legal, as well as contributions from contractors, Anchorage home builders, reviewing code. Yeah, so, and then we sent it over to, I think it was probably about a month ago, I sent it over to the building board, so just before the 1st of November.
Yeah.
Looking for their income, looking for their input contributions.
Okay, thanks. That's helpful, Mr. Cross. I did hear that there have been some issues on the residential side, and I heard you mention that. And so the question I have is, why not have more term contracts that are managed by municipal staff, so that the muni has the contracts for the independent review, so that there's never a bottleneck, but there still is that, I almost look at the muni as the third party in a sense.
Mhm.
And I guess the second part of the question would be is, do you see another way to address some of the issues that the sponsors want to address?
Yeah, that would be a valid approach, and I can imagine that many of these other jurisdictions that have a private plan review option, I would imagine that they do it in a more controlled fashion in terms of where they have contractors doing reviews. Because I know, like a lot of your smaller communities that that don't have enough construction to really have a building department with engineers and all these experts. They contract out their building department basically. So, that would be, in my mind, probably, I think our residential process currently is maybe a little too free flowing, free for all. It could be more controlled with oversight of the reviewers.
Thanks. I have heard indirectly, and I would really like to have some actual data, though, that there are problems on the residential side with the code, and that that we need to take a look at how that's working. But I don't know. Have those problems been documented? Do you know? And maybe we're getting off topic, but I think it would be helpful, if we had, some of that information to take a look and see how any proposed changes could be structured to avoid some of the problems on the residential side.
Yeah, and we have not been keeping data, unfortunately. Like we've got this many that went bad and this many that went good. Obviously, though, that we could go back and we remember a lot of the ones that went bad, because generally when they go bad, they go pretty bad. And but yeah, we could go back and gather some information on that kind of stuff. But yeah.
Thank you. I'll go ahead and oh, actually, I do have one last question before we go to Ms. Zelatel. And do I read the AO correctly, and maybe this is to the sponsors, that this completely removes the option to go to municipal staff? No. Okay.
This is to the chair. No,
So that option would still remain?
that option would absolutely still remain.
Okay. Ms. Zelatel, you're next in the queue.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You kind of read my mind where I was going with term contracts.
Ms.
I
Zelatel?
apologize for being a little bit.
Ms. Zelatel, we can't hear you, or at least I can't. It's a little bit quiet. Could you speak up?
Sure. Is that better?
Yeah, that's a little better. Thank you.
Thank you. So Ms. LaFrance read my mind a little bit with term contracts, and I apologize for being late to the conversation. Does the department currently use term contracts? And are they used for both residential and commercial?
Yes, we currently have 2-term contracts in place for commercial structural plan review.
And would the capacity of those term contracts be able to pick up any needs that you have with the upcoming vacancies that you foresee until you're able to hire, or if you had a surge in demand?
Yes, I believe they could. Although the timing right now with staff leaving going into the slow time of year really provides us a window to hire. And so I don't really anticipate any problems with that.
Okay, I appreciate that. The reason for these questions is I think that having term contracts and having maybe more individuals involved might lead to more information, particularly around the questions Ms. LaFrance asked about if there were code changes needed. It would just be more perspectives being brought to the table, while in the meantime ensuring that the municipality is still overseeing those contracts to ensure the quality of work. So I think it's an interesting approach that could be used to hopefully get at what the sponsors are trying to do, but still give us the reassurance it's the same quality of work that we've come to expect in the municipality. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Zalatel. And I believe Mr. Cross wanted to respond to one of the points you raised. Go ahead, Mr. Cross.
Yeah, I think Mr. Knopfsinger points out why this is actually important. You know, our building department, as he stated, does not work as consistent. It is not we get 2 files a week. It is we have an extremely busy peak season, and then you have long durations. You have maybe longer durations where it's less. Meanwhile, we have to stay staffed at pretty much our maximum level, which is good and bad. It's both expensive. It both requires a lot of manpower at the municipal level, which then begs the question, what are they working on during times of slow construction? And then additionally, during those peak periods, we can get behind because we're not utilizing the private sector and our pool of very talented engineers that are available. So what I would like to do, unless anybody else has any questions for Mr. Knopfsinger, I would like to invite members from the Alaska General Contractor Association, American Home Builders, or some of the other contractors I invited to come here, because I think it's important both to have the perspective of what the building department sees, but also what our contractors are dealing with and why they felt it was important that I bring forth this legislation.
And before we do that, actually, I have Mr. Gates in the queue and Mr. Constant, and then we can go ahead and shift to that next portion.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I had 2 questions. I can't promise I'll keep it to 2. But first was the building board's letter referred to the already existing third-party independent structural review process. And we mentioned that where no one requests it when they submit their plans to outsource the plan review. In the current code, I only found that referenced in the fee table, so I didn't find anywhere where it mentions that outsourcing plan review process. That's not actually outlined in code like we're doing here. Is that right?
Yeah, correct. That's not outlined in code.
So I think when I look at it that way, it seems that, well, if someone's submitting and asking for outsourcing plan review, they're not guaranteed the right to have that outsourced, are they? I mean, I think that's a big difference between this ordinance that's proposed and the current process. Is this says that the applicant will have the right to have independent plan review, and the current process, though they don't actually have the right, but it's like it's agreeable to the department. They will allow outsourcing review. And I guess that's rarely denied, but it's not guaranteed right, just the way I kind of was reading it. Is that right?
Yeah, I never really thought of it that way. I mean, if someone requests to send something out, we send it out. I never thought that we could say, no, we're not sending it out, you know?
Okay. Well, it's nice you've never said no, I suppose. So the other question I had was for the current residential plan review process, when someone does an independent third-party review and they bring their reviewed plans already stamped by that reviewing professional, that doesn't mean that plan reviewers don't look at it at all, don't they? I guess they've done the heavy lifting and the grunt work from the independent party, but reviewers do take a look and see that everything's, I guess, that needed to be reviewed was reviewed. It's not like you do nothing at all. Is that right?
All we look for is to make sure that there's a third-party reviewer stamp on the plans, that there's a third-party letter of review submitted with it, that they submit the waiver of claims for the MOA, and that's all we look for. We don't back check to see whether or not a case of fraud's been submitted. We actually did have that happen one time. But we don't do any sort of did they do a good review? We don't do anything like that.
I guess, I mean, do you double check the calculations, make sure the structure is going to be safe?
No, we don't.
Okay. Well, thank you. I think that's why.
Thank you, Mr. Gates. Mr. Constant?
Hi there, thanks. Can you hear me?
Actually, could you speak up a little?
Sure, I'll get closer. Okay, interesting question that came up. It's a preliminary question. Ross, when an agency, a company, a builder wants an independent third-party plan reviewer submits for it, do they get to, who is the entity that does that third-party review, or does the department?
We would generally contact both agencies and ask them, how quickly can you turn this over? And we would send it to, who happens to be most available at the time.
Right, so you would identify the reviewer.
If they wanted to use one reviewer over the other, we would let them do that.
Okay, so that kind of gets to the place where I'm concerned. I have my concerns with this project. The idea of a reviewer is like, to me, an audit in a financial world or in a program world where you're delivering services. And that third party aspect has to be really solid. It can't be a de facto agency relationship where you consistently work with the same reviewer because your habits and patterns might become very comfortable, and then mistakes might slip by, or behavior that is less kind of high caliber might occur because of the default nature of a kind of a de facto agency relationship. And so I'm not sure I can support this in the way that it's drafted, because I think that it does allow for the potential for harm to happen in the area that we as government have a very high responsibility, and that's the safety of the buildings within the municipality. And I'm a little surprised to hear that we, when an independent third-party review is done, simply require the engineer and the builder to sign a waiver that says the muni isn't liable if this building falls down. That tells me that this issue is something we have to look very closely at. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. I believe Mr. Cross wanted to respond to the points you raised.
Yeah, I think it's important to note that we use third-party independent contractors in some very, very serious inspections, and we rely upon them. An example would be the annual inspection of fire alarm, fire sprinkler systems, range hood systems. Our fire department, as we learned through our utility oversight and through our, not utility oversight, but public safety meeting as a whole, that they rely, and our fire inspections rely heavily upon fire protection contractors to make sure that those systems are working adequately. And you can understand that if there's a building that doesn't have a properly functioning fire sprinkler or fire alarm panel, that there is a massive hazard for a loss of life incident. And yet we are okay farming out those inspections to the private sector. That is a significant health and life safety issue. I would put that on par with structural review. The difference being the fire department will also go out and periodically do visual inspections to make sure that those fire protection contractors are in fact checking deficiencies or checking on those properties to make sure that their systems are being adequately inspected. And likewise, in this process, we also have the inspections that happen when they physically go out and inspect the property to double check that in the terms of construction. So I would say that is that concern that the independent third-party contractors are somehow or may build up a relationship with an individual could exist on multiple fronts where we're utilizing third-party contractors for inspections. So I understand the concern, but that hasn't reared its head in the form of fire protection inspections and certifications. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cross. I want to note for the record, we've been joined on the phone by Ms. Quinn Davidson, and I just have a couple quick questions for Mr. Notzinger, and then we can move on to the next part here. So just for clarification, if a third-party reviewer is used for the plan review, is staff allowed to look at the review, or is that once it goes down that track, then staff is unable to review it?
Are you referring to the residential process?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that, to be quite honest, things actually get pretty political there. It was kind of understood that that we were not to do any sort of plan review on any of these third-party review projects, so we weren't. Yeah.
And then when we're talking about third-party review, we're talking about where, in this instance, where the builders hire their own plan reviewers. Just so I'm using that correctly or referring to it correctly, right? Where the selection of the reviewer is handled, as in the residential case, by the contractor or the builder.
Yeah.
That's correct, right?
Oh, could you rephrase that question, please?
I just want to make sure that I'm using the correct terminology to align with what we have here. And so when we're talking about independent third-party plan reviewers, we're talking about scenarios where a builder or contractor hires the plan reviewer directly.
Yes, correct. The way the ordinance is drafted is the builder would hire the plan reviewer, completely outside of the permitting process, basically, and get their project reviewed and approved, and then submit the final result.
Understood.
Yep.
Okay, thanks. And we have about a little over 15 minutes left. So let's go ahead, Mr. Cross, and if you want to bring up your other folks. Thank you so much,
Yeah,
Mr.
I did.
Notzinger.
If Mr. Trombley is available, I would like him to speak as to the administration's and his experience with this, seeing his position with our.
And I
And
did.
then, just out of interest of time, and if there's time, I do have, it's a work session. Sometimes we get flexible. There are some individuals from the professional contracting commercial industry who I've asked to attend. But if time is available, I'd like them to speak to their experience in some of the complications that have arisen and why they felt this would be beneficial to the municipality.
And Kevin, or Mr. Cross, I just want to note too that Ms. Zalatel has a question for you at
Oh,
some
fantastic.
point.
Thank you.
Welcome, Mr. Trombley.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Trombley. Would you mind sharing your impression of how expanding independent plan review to commercial construction may be beneficial or harmful?
Sure. Through the chair, Mr. Cross, Adam Trombley, Mayor, Chief of Staff. Just for historical understanding, I was the one that wrote the third-party independent plan review for residential, which is single-family duplex. The administration is supportive of the ordinance. The administration is supportive of anything that's going to help get more multifamily housing, because that obviously the assembly knows anything from triplex up is considered commercial. So that's what this would apply for, or this would apply to. The administration is supportive of anything that will speed up the process for housing.
Excellent. What has been the administration's communications with, say, the private sector? What was it? What that generated this, or maybe you can speak a little bit about what generated the residential independent review, some of the complications, and what we have seen as a result of this change.
Sure. Through the chair, Mr. Cross. So the reason that the third-party plan review came up was I looked at, as an assembly member, I looked at other jurisdictions and what they did to help speed up residential housing, to make the process move a little bit faster while at the same time protecting the public. And obviously working with industry was very helpful. AHBA at the time. One of the things that I think sold it to the assembly at that time when it did pass was the fact that it wasn't going to take revenue away from the department. I don't believe this one does either, but it also ensured that there was protections for the end user, the homeowner, it's him or herself, because there are insurance requirements for a third-party plan reviewer. The other thing that I think is important to understand is that when you put your engineer stamp on a plan and says that yes, this does meet building code, that they're putting their reputation, their career, their livelihood on the line as well. There were engineers, architects are required to sign an oath with the state that they are in fact serving the public and serving their industry as well. So there are a tremendous amount of safeguards available. Does that mean everybody's perfect? Well, of course not. That's why you have insurance. But I understand the industry isn't very happy with the third-party plan review for residential.
Thank you.
Ms. Zalatel?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Actually, my question for Mr. Cross is adequate for Mr. Tremblay as well. And is it intended in this change that third-party plan review for commercial structures would require the same waiver, basically relieving the municipality of any potential liability or responsibility for commercial structures that are reviewed by a third party?
If I may respond, yes. If you look on page 5, starting at line 37, section D, I believe that's 5D, the independent reviewing professional indemnifies, hold harmless, and states he or she shall defend the municipality of Anchorage from and against all claims, damages, losses, expenses, including but not limited to attorney fees, costs arising or resulting from the performance or the review to the fullest extent permitted by law. And above that, it does talk in section C, 1, 2, and 3. It does talk about the requirement to have professional liability insurance for a minimum coverage of $1 million, and coverage must extend for no shorter of a period than 2 years. And so, yes, we were rigorous in making sure that just because we were using third party, that the protections were arduous for the public and for their and for those utilizing those services.
Okay, well, thank you for that, Mr. Cross. I think I still have concerns about that, and I'm going to ask, not in this moment for Dean to weigh in, but I would like to really consider what limitations may exist in that language, because I hear $1 million. $1 million isn't going to be enough if a commercial structure collapses in an earthquake and people are killed. I'm also concerned just about the general liability. I understand in residential, I mean, I actually have some concerns with that, but in commercial construction, particularly for large structures where there could be hundreds of people in the building when something could go wrong. And then I don't believe, and this is again for Mr. Gates, that language covers what might happen to the building. It seemed to be for the plan review. So I would want to make sure that language was strong enough to cover when, if something were to happen to, during like a natural disaster or a fire, and there was some later structural issue with the building, that the municipality wouldn't be on the hook, because when the litigation comes, everyone's going to be named, including the municipality. Thanks.
Through the chair, if I may respond.
Go ahead, Mr. Cross.
Thank you, Ms. Zalatel. I think it is important to note that the current requirement for residential is only $250,000. And the average sales price of a home in Anchorage right now is about $440,000. So the requirement on the residential is roughly half of what the average sales price of a house is. And so if that's a code change we want to make, we can have that discussion. But $1 million is 4 times what the residential is. And although commercial does extend to some very large projects, that's an excellent question on what would be adequate levels. Because if $1 million isn't enough for commercial, then probably 250,000 isn't good enough for residential, and we've been operating within that scope for some time. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cross. Any follow-up, Ms. Zalatel?
No, Madam Chair, other than I will look forward to some follow-up with Mr. Gates offline.
Thank you, Ms. Zalatel. Next is Mr. Constant.
Thanks. And Ms. Alto kind of nailed the question that I had.
A little bit louder,
That-
Mr. Constant.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks.
Ms. Alto kind of nailed the question that I had. And it really seems the liability issue is almost impossible to indemnify against, even if it's in the code, because my understanding of how these things work is the deep pockets always end up paying. In this case, it's the muni who has the responsibility to ensure the safety of the design in the buildings. Therefore, it's our pockets, even if we say in the language of the code. So I would love the same analysis that Ms. Zalatel asked for from Mr. Gates.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Mr. Trombley?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do believe that currently, whether even if you're not using third-party plan review, that the city is indemnified against those. I can follow up with that, but I'm pretty confident it was 10 years ago when I wrote the third party for residential. I think it is now that even if the city does a review and the structure falls down, the city is indemnified against that.
Thank you, Mr. Trombley. Any follow-up, Mr. Constant?
Nope, just Mr. Gates. It's conversation I think we need to have.
Mr. Gates?
Thank you. Yeah, on that question directed towards me about municipalities' liability if there were suppose an earthquake or something, structures fail, people get injured. The basis of such, I guess, an injury claim would be that the municipality issued a permit, like the building permit, and in general, there's immunity for the municipalities and state statute that was really the first sort of affirmative defense that any attorney would claim if there were a lawsuit filed against the municipality. We're immune from this type of liability. And so that's in Alaska Statute 970 or 65, if I remember it right. But we can follow up with a little more detail if wanted.
Follow-up question.
Thank you, Mr. Gates. Go ahead, Mr. Cross.
So, Mr. Gates, based on that, if the state and the municipality is indemnified, wouldn't this AO go further to protect a property owner, considering if they use a third party, they would actually have insurance not otherwise afforded?
I'm not sure if I understood the question, but that immunity wouldn't extend to the independent third-party plan reviewer. That's why they have these insurance requirements. So,
My question is, if a commercial contractor were to utilize the third party under this AO where they're required to have $1 million in liability insurance, that would be a coverage that's not currently afforded when they go through the municipality of Anchorage, the current process. Is that correct, or am I mistaken?
it sounds correct to me, yes. And thinking about that dollar amount, I mean, I had some ideas, but we can follow up later.
Thank you. And that was the intention of this legislation, by the way. I want to make sure you're all aware. Currently, you're not insured at all. This actually adds protections we don't have, because if you choose to use someone outside the municipality using this third party for your structural, you're getting an insurance coverage, or at least a partial coverage that right now you are not afforded because the municipality and the state are indemnified. That was another reason that this was, beneficial to builders, because not only can we get expedited service, not only can we utilize individuals that may have equal to or greater qualifications than those within the MOA, but now we're also getting additional insurance and we're getting coverage for those that we don't currently have. So I really appreciate that being brought up.
I would just add one thing there. I think even without this ordinance, that plan designers, they architects, engineers, they have insurance generally. They submit those plans that are reviewed by the municipalities' plan reviewers currently and stamped as approved. So we have that same sort of immunity for the plan reviewer, the municipalities' plan reviewers. Here it's a little different, except I think that if someone were to file a lawsuit under what's currently there, or someone who originally designed the plans and then the municipality issued a permit after their plan review, there's still that claim, I guess, in insurance from the original designer. There's no liability from the municipality. So I'm not sure if there's going to be a big difference. It's a complicated question, though, but I think that that you have a good point there.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gates. Thank you, Mr. Cross. Mr. Constant?
Yeah, thank you. And that seems to raise the question of whether there should be a requirement of insurance on these projects. Something definitely to be contemplating. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Anyone else? Mr. Peterson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And so it's my understanding that when you have a contractor that's doing a project, building a house or a commercial building, they have insurance that covers them during the construction phase. Is that right? And that's usually more than liability, right? So if they're damages and et cetera.
Yes.
Okay. So what we're talking about is just liability insurance in case someone comes back later and says, hey, wait a minute, the design was flawed in this. And so naturally the building fell down as soon as we had a little shaker, right? So, okay. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. And I'll just add that I would like some additional clarification in this area, because my understanding is that any engineer who stamps something, whether it's an engineer who is on a term contract with the Muni or employed by the Muni or hired by a consultant, will have that errors and emissions insurance. And I don't know how this all factors in, like down the road, if we're talking about something huge, like a seismic event and FEMA's involved. I mean, who's on the hook? I mean, I don't know how all that factors in, but it would be very helpful to have some further clarification on those points that Ms. Zelatel and Mr. Constant raised, and you all as well, before we take this up or when we take this up. Thanks. Anybody else? Check the queue.
Just as we're wrapping up here, I know we're right against it. Is there anybody here from the Association of General Contractors or a Home Builders Association or in the contractors that I invited?
On the phone. Can you hear us on the phone?
Oh, excellent.
Can't hear you so well. Sir, would you speak up, please?
Yes, is this better?
Yes,
Just a little
excellent.
better.
Go ahead and state
Okay,
your name
great.
and who you're with.
This is Luke Blomfield with Davis Constructors and Engineers and Mass Excavation, and also with the Associated General Contractors, though I am speaking now on behalf of Mass Excavation and Davis Constructors and Engineers. So we're a large commercial general contractor that works both horizontal and civil throughout the state. We've done many projects within the municipality of Anchorage, and we have both gone a traditional plan review and we have gone a third-party plan review on some of our projects. The times where third-party plan review has been pursued was in areas where we were constructing buildings that I would say pushing the limits of the experience of the structural reviewer. And so a third party was brought in both for timeliness and for their level of comfort with reviewing that sort of structure. We've done it a few times, and in both, or in all instances, it's resulted in a extremely thorough and well done review that was timely and produced benefits to the overall schedule of the project, allowing it to complete on time and on budget, and to most importantly start without impacts associated with weather constraints. As Ross discussed earlier, when there's a plethora of projects that are submitted in March and a review takes quite a bit of time before you can procure material. It may not be until October, November that you actually have the material and the plan review in place to start foundations, which is part of the structure. And starting a foundation in October, November is never optimal for cost or schedule. So if the municipality is overwhelmed with other submittals and we're able to jump in to a third-party plan review to provide our clients with an opportunity to meet a schedule and not be impacted by winter conditions, that's something we absolutely would encourage. You know, there were some questions on liability that I think need to be clarified. The design team for a project, the architect and engineers will carry, or in sometimes, depending on if it's a design build contract, the contractor will carry errors and emissions or professional liability insurance. Through the state of Alaska, there are requirements on the tail of that professional liability insurance, and it's also included in contracts with those different members of the professional community, anywhere from a few years to upwards of 10 years. And so if there is an error in the design or calculation of the building structure, they're able to pursue recourse in that time period to resolve the issues with the, whatever caused the design deficiency. There's also insurance for general liability for contractors that after completion of a project, there's a window that can be pursued from an owner or client if there is a deficiency from workmanship or material. And then there's also an owner's general liability that would cover their insurance if something falls outside of that, which, there could be multiple events that would do so. So, there were other items as far as, who becomes liable from the structural review. I mean, right now, it was pointed out the municipality of Anchorage does not have any liability associated with their plan review. If they have an error in reviewing the structural design and miss something and it's brought up in the field, a contractor has no recourse to go back to municipality and say, we put it in for the drawings, you reviewed the drawings, you approved the drawings, and now we have to take completed work out and put it back in place based on an inspector's comment in the field. So what that does is, cost time and money. Having a third-party plan review, we have a recourse to go back to the third-party plan reviewer and say, why did you miss this? How did you miss this? What can you do to make this right for us? How quickly can you help us find a solution? So there's definitely a benefit to the owner and the contractor from that side. I think that we can't gloss over the fact that the engineers and architects and third parties here are all licensed professionals, licensed with the state, licensed with the other states. We had someone on earlier, discussing their license and professional requirements as an eye doctor, and I forgot the name, and I'm sorry about that. But it's the same for any professional within this field. You expect that when they go through their education and they go through the classes as well as the exams and all the scrutiny under professional liability, that they're going to perform to the requirements of that field and that trade, and they're going to do it with honesty and integrity. Are there a couple of sour grapes or bad apples in that group? There always is going to be, but you can't throw away the 99% that are doing things good because of the 1% that are not going to follow the rules. And whether or not you have this third-party plan review, you're still going to have people that are going to try to ignore the rules.
Thank you for that information.
I think that's about all I've got.
We are at the end of our time and 5 minutes over. And I know that this has raised a few more questions for me. I know that field inspections are always checked against the approved plans. And so I definitely would benefit from some further clarification of some of these issues as we take it up. But Mr. Cross, I'll go to you for any final words.
Yes, thank you very much. What Luke says here from, he was just on the phone, I think again, proves why this is necessary. Okay. the argument that we have that, if you put this burden on the private sector, that the bad apples, that, that buildings are going to collapse. It has been my experience that bad apples exist everywhere, even within the municipality. We are not without our own flaws. Okay. However, it has also been my experience that by utilizing those individuals who are highly qualified, educated, have strong ethical behavior, who may not be municipal employees but are private contractors, we generally get a better product. The intention here is not for us, is to resolve the housing issue that we have. And this was one of the issues that was brought to our attention. The truth is that during the peak construction period, there is a bottleneck. There is complications, and sometimes within the municipality, as good as they are, they run across, just like Luke said, items that they are not, that they have limited experience with.
And Mr. Cross?
Yes, ma'am.
Just a reminder that we're not debating
Okay.
right now.
Yeah.
Appreciate the points you raised, and you can bring them all up on Tuesday, because this is item 14F on the agenda for our regular meeting on.
Well, I apologize to those individuals who showed up who were hoping to speak to this. I hope they can make it on Tuesday when this goes to public testimony, provided that it does, because I think that when you start listening to more of the contractors and their issues and their concerns and why they felt this was necessary, it'll be even more illuminating.
Thank you, Mr. Cross, and thank you for bringing this issue forward. As I noted earlier, I very much appreciate the conversation and the opportunity to consider how we might make our processes more efficient and hopefully resulting in a greater housing stock, because we know we're in the midst of pretty much a crisis when it comes to affordable and attainable housing. Thank you all for being here today and for joining us. And apologies if there were some folks who weren't able to speak. Again, this will be before us on Tuesday. And with that, we are adjourned.